Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Troutvetter. In this week's episode, FBO editor Curt Epstein explains the controversy over the recent FBO lease awards at California's John Wayne Orange County Airport. And he also provides updates on sustainable aviation fuel efforts by Phillips 66 and Avfuel in the Golden State. Editor-in-Chief Matt Thurber talks about his at-home experience with Rolls-Royce's new remote virtual reality familiarization training for its BR700 series engines. And Washington, D.C.-based editor Kerry Lynch gives highlights of CAE's recent quarterly results in its consolidation plans, in addition to an overview of Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Act bills that are now pending in the House and Senate. So, Curt, there's a lot of FBO news this week in California, so let's start with John Wayne County in California.
Well, at John Wayne Orange County Airport, they have had a large rezoning and development plan in the works now. It's part of their master plan. And last year, they put an RFP out for the FBOs, and they're totally going to remodel and rejigger everything around, knock down FBOs, rebuild FBOs, and this week on Tuesday, they decided which were going to be the FBOs that were going to be selected. One of them was ACI Jet, and that was brought onto the airport in 2017. It replaced Signature Flight Support in what people considered a stunning move at the time. They're continuing to go on. It's a California-based company. And the other one, which was also a shocker, is Clay Lacy Aviation, which is going to replace Atlantic Aviation, which has been there for 17 years. And in the RFP process, Atlantic Aviation actually scored 475 points out of a possible 500, nearly 100 points more than Clay Lacy Aviation. And I heard from Lou Pepper, who's the CEO of Atlantic Aviation today, and they said they're very surprised that they didn't receive the bid given their tenure there of 17 years and their highest score in the RFP process. I reached out to the Orange County Board of Supervisors for a comment on why they went with Clay Lacy over the higher scoring Atlantic, but they never responded back to me.
So let's talk about the larger picture here. They're basically demolishing the Atlantic facilities right now, and they're going to make that into a lighter GA facility by Jay's Aircraft, which is already existing on the field. And then ACI Jets is going to stay in their existing facility, and there's one new site. I think it's on the northwest side. Is that right?
Yes. One's going to be on the northwest side of the airport. The other one's going to be on the northeast side of the airport.
And so really the big battle was over that new site. And it seems that even though Atlantic Aviation scored higher, they chose Clay Lacy. Did Atlantic say anything further about what they plan to do?
They didn't. They said they're still digesting this, and obviously they're still deciding what to do with this as they process it. There's some suspicions that the Orange County could have just decided to go with the local team. You've got ACI Jet, which is located in San Luis Obispo. You've got Clay Lacy, which is headquartered in Van Nuys. So there may have been some home cooking involved there, a little bit of a push for the home team.
Yeah, but aren't they supposed to go with a scoring? That was done by an independent company, right? That was a third-party company that did all the scoring?
Well, yeah, the RFP process was by the airport. And the airport, obviously, it posted the numbers that they received. And as I mentioned, Atlantic scored a pretty darn near perfect score on this, a 475 out of 500. So you'd think that, what was the point of having an RFP process if you're not going to go, not going to uphold it?
Yeah, I expect we're going to hear more from this.
I would think so. I would think that there's going to be some kind of a protest or contesting of this that's going to be filed.
Right. Well, there's other news too. Phillips 66 is converting a petroleum processing plant near San Francisco into a sustainable aviation fuel processing plant. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, well, they're applying to make this conversion to this processing plant, this refinery in Rodeo, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they've presented the paperwork. And there's two bodies: the county has to approve it, and also the Bay Area Air Monitoring District has to approve it. And once they do, Phillips 66 is going to convert this over entirely to a sustainable fuels plant. It's going to use feedstocks such as grease, used cooking oil, soybean oil, various things like that, and not crude. And it's going to produce, when it's all going, which they say should be about 2024, they're picturing an output of about 680 million gallons of fuel a year. And that's going to mean not just SAF, it's also going to be renewable gasoline, renewable diesel, but also the sustainable aviation fuels. And there's another project that they have ongoing, which, if that's online as well, could bring it up to about 800 million gallons a year, which would make it the largest such facility in the world.
But the big thing is the infrastructure for SAF, which, the availability has been one of the big issues, right?
That's true. I mean, when you consider, you're talking gallons, and when aviation was in full stride and talking about commercial aviation pre-COVID, they were talking millions of barrels of fuel, not millions of gallons. So you still got to put this in perspective. But it is increasing the availability of SAF once all these things go online. There's other plants that are underway in various parts of the country. There's one outside in Nevada. There's a large one that's being built in Europe, and these things, from what I understand, are still ongoing, even despite the COVID pandemic. So gradually, the flow of SAF is going to be available to those who want it, and it's going to be coming online in larger and larger quantities, which is, considering this is still a nascent industry, is important for its growth.
Right. And also Avfuel had some news on SAF this week too, and it's California centric as well.
Yeah, it's California seems to be the center for news this week as far as the FBO industry goes. But ACI Jet, which I mentioned previously as being at John Wayne Orange County Airport, has other facilities. It has in Santa Ana. It has San Luis Obispo. It has Paso Robles. It's receiving a couple loads, as a matter of fact, of sustainable aviation fuel from Avfuel. It's going to receive 7,300 gallons in its Santa Ana facility, and then it's going to split a load of 7,300 gallons between San Luis Obispo and Paso Robles. So that's about 15,000 gallons rounded up. And they picture that as being worth a 4 metric ton reduction in CO2 emissions. So the company, has its sustainability goals, and the customers who choose to use this, also wish to improve their carbon emissions footprint. So it's going to go into ACI Jet's general fuel storage tanks, and they'll be used in any aircraft that's requesting fuel following the deliveries.
Well, that's good news. I mean, we really need the companies, the suppliers, to continue to ramp this up, and it seems like they are.
Yeah, and as far as most of these, the fuel right now, large portion of it's produced in California. So it makes sense that California facilities would be the first to get this delivered. And this is just a one-off still, but San Francisco Airport, I believe, is in the midst of having a pipeline installed directly to provide SAF to the airport. But what's going to be done is a lot of these airports will receive the fuel and they'll use it in aircraft that are taking off from there. What other places are going to do is what's called a book and bill. Say you have an aircraft taking off at Teterboro and it wants to use SAF, they can then pay any surplus that they would normally pay above and beyond the regular jet fuel to cover the cost of the SAF. They can take the credit for it. That fuel will be dispersed on the other side of the country, however, into another jet. And basically, it doesn't really matter. We only have one environment. It doesn't matter which airplane actually burns the fuel, but it can actually then theoretically make SAF fuel available to anybody who wants it.
Interesting. All right. Thanks, Curt. So, Matt, you got some equipment in the mail this week. You did a Rolls-Royce virtual reality training on the BR700 series. So tell us about the equipment and what the experience is like.
Absolutely, Chad. This is a fascinating experience. Rolls-Royce, I found out recently, is just this year started virtual reality training for familiarization for mechanics on the BR700 series engine. And this is perfect timing. It was actually launched in March just as the COVID pandemic was taking hold, and Rolls-Royce has been conducting virtual classes using this technology with great results. So when I heard about it, I asked if I could try it, and a few days later, this giant container arrives on my front door, and it's got a well-padded Oculus Rift set of VR glasses, as well as a big, powerful gaming laptop. The first thing I had to do is follow the instructions from Rolls-Royce. Tells you step by step how to hook it up and get it ready. And at the appointed time, I logged into the system, and Rolls-Royce instructor Jason Whitman was in my ears, and we were virtually standing in a big hangar where he could show me how the system works. It was really interesting. I hadn't spent a lot of time with good VR glasses before, and this was my first real experience with an interactive setup like this. And it not only comes with the glasses, but you have hand controls too. So you can move things around with your hands, you can select things. That's your interface with the system. Basically, when we materialized inside this hangar, there's this BR-725 engine just sitting out there floating in the middle of the hangar. And you can walk up to it if you have enough room inside the physical room where you're located. Or if you don't, you can teleport your virtual self right over next to the engine. And once you do that, you can highlight parts of the engine. You can take it apart right down to the nuts and bolts. You can split it into different modules. You can pull apart each system on the engine. Like you can grab the entire fuel system, including the electronic engine control, and pull it away from the engine and see exactly how the fuel system works. And as the instructor, Jason is right there next to me. Obviously, I don't see a body. I just see his virtual glasses floating there. But he can grab a highlighter and he can draw pictures right on this fuel system that I pulled out of the engine to look at. And he can also point things out on the engine. He can draw on the engine or on any parts. There's another really super cool feature where you can cut cross sections into the engine from any direction, up, down, from either the front or the back, if you want to look at how the engine's put together. And it was fascinating because we cut a cross section from front to back, top to bottom. And Jason showed me how there's these special air tubes in between some of the compressor sections. And you could see exactly where the air comes from and how it flows through to cool off the compressor, and how that same airflow goes to the front to seal the main front bearing. It was just a fascinating way of looking at this engine.
Is this like would it normally be a longer training course? How long is the training in? Do the mechanics get certified? Is BR-700 certified mechanics after this, or what happens?
Well, this is at this point is just a familiarization training course. They're hoping in the future to add actual line maintenance, but the course lasts, I think it's 4 days normally, and it's normally done in person. So somebody has to fly out there and give them the normal PowerPoint training class with diagrams and animated images of how things flow through the engine. But it's interesting because Jason's worked with quite a few different mechanics on this training, and he recently had an older mechanic who's got years of experience on Rolls-Royce engines who was quite skeptical about the benefits of this training. And this older mechanic, after he went through it, he told Jason that it just wildly exceeded his expectations, and this is the way he wants to do his training in the future.
Wow, that's great. So actually, let's stay on subject with training. And Kerry, you did a story on CAE this week. They announced their first quarter fiscal year, first quarter 21 results, which is actually the April, May, and June timeframe. So they're consolidating the industry, the business, though, right? They're not doing so well during COVID.
With Chad, it's funny because it's not funny, but a lot of the focus of the effects of COVID have been on the airlines or the manufacturers. But what's happening at CAE just shows the rippling effect of how all this is affecting the entire industry. And with CAE, they're going through a restructuring, and there are a couple of impetuses from it, but obviously COVID is the primary one. And in the first quarter, CAE as a total lost $110 million. Of that, $97.9 million came from civil aviation training solutions alone. And that was a turnaround of from $100 million gain or something around there the year before. So the effects of COVID was very stark for the training provider. They said that at their low point in the quarter, they were only at 20% operational capacity. And it's risen since then, but they're still only operating at about 40% right now. So it's slow coming, and it's particularly slow coming in the airline sector. They say business aviation hasn't been hit quite as hard and is going to improve sooner. But, they see the airlines lagging behind. Now, that doesn't mean they haven't done any business. They were able to get a bunch of contracts, and they did deliver a couple simulators, but they're a little worried about the future. So that sets the stage of how they're going to approach it. And they've decided to restructure, and that includes layoffs. It's 350 layoffs. For the workers in Canada, however, who are affected among those 350, they will have the option to move to a different line that produces medical equipment and keep their jobs. But it also includes consolidation of facilities, and they haven't pinpointed all the ones yet, but they said that they're going to look at areas where they have duplicate facilities and just consolidate them for efficiency's sake, and of course to save money, obviously. But they are not exiting any markets. But all of this will require shifting of simulators. So some of the simulators will be transferred to areas where it makes more sense. And again, they're not detailing that just yet, but it's possible that some simulators actually get sidelined as well. During all of this, though, they're also looking to increase their digital footprint. Now, they've already been into the digital end, but I think COVID, with CAE and many other companies, it just accelerated and pushed digital to the forefront. So they're looking at more permanent work from home situations, and they're looking at possibility of training, distance learning and certification type activities, whatever they can do remotely, they're going to try to do that. And, during COVID, they began even doing maintenance instruction remotely. They set up a whole new digital platform that they called Airside, which is like a community where they can provide information and other resources to pilots on, issues that are hot topics for them. So there's a lot going on with CAE right now.
Well, it sounds like they have a path forward, so that's good.
Yeah, and they have to. They immediately when this happened, they took some very big measures to put them into good financial position to weather this storm because they just knew it was unpredictable. And, they're continuing, even though Mark Parent yesterday, said the worst is behind them, they still don't know what's going to happen, whether there's going to be a second wave. And so they lined up credit facilities. They were very strict with their spending. They cut back on research and development. And even during the first quarter, they actually had furloughs of 2,600 workers. Now, most of them have been recalled, and that action is completely separate from the 350 layoffs because that was temporary.
So let's say get into saving jobs. There's two bills, actually one in the House and one in the Senate, and they're very similar, that are intended to be Job Act bills for the aviation industry. So tell us about those, Kerry.
Yeah, so this week in the House Aviation Subcommittee Chairman, Rick Larsen, and Representative Ron Estes, who's a Kansas lawmaker who also sits on the Tax Writing Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, introduced the Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Protection Act. It is a companion bill, if you will, of a bill that was introduced in May in the Senate by another Kansas lawmaker, Jerry Moran, joining a Virginia lawmaker, Mark Warner. What the bill does, it takes a whole unique approach to helping preserve jobs. And first of all, these bills are focused on aviation manufacturing jobs. So as people say, well, Congress already gave assistance to help aviation jobs through the CARES Act. Those were aimed at airline employees and companies that support the airlines, such as some maintenance operators and whatnot. So this is a whole different segment of jobs, even though it's still within the aviation industry. But it's not a complete, let's pay salaries for a certain amount of time. It's a partnership for the manufacturers to get this money. So the way it's set up is it will fund 50% of a worker's salary for workers that are in so-called at-risk categories. And at-risk is somebody who would otherwise have been furloughed. And to get this coverage of their salary, actually total compensation, it covers benefits too. To get this, the manufacturer has to enter into an agreement with the government saying they will keep those people on staff. And they have to demonstrate that they were at risk for furlough otherwise. And it only applies to 25% of the total workforce. So you can't get coverage for anything beyond that. And you have to agree that you will keep them on staff. And there's some very strict controls to how you use the money. But if you're a company accepting that, you have to cover the other half of the salary. So the government will only cover 50%.
And how long is that for?
The program is in effect till 2022. I think it's the end of April in 2022. But the compensation, the agreements are 6 months, but they're renewable. And you can have a single company can have multiple agreements, but and the agreements specifically are with the Department of Treasury. A company can have multiple agreements, but the sum total of agreements cannot exceed 25% of their workforce.
And these were introduced by bipartisan. So one of the sponsors was a Republican and one was a Democrat. So what's the census on whether this could pass the full Senate and the full House?
Well, that's the trickier question. The interesting part about having Ron Estes, even though he's a Kansas representative, so obviously there's a parochial interest there, is that he's on the Ways and Means Committee, and this is a tax bill and would have to go through that committee. So it's helpful to have somebody in that position, even if it's in the minority in this case, backing the bill. Now, Rick Larsen, he's the chairman of a very important committee that might want to ask for jurisdiction or just a simple nod. And he works very closely hand in hand with the chairman of that committee, DeFazio. Now, having said that, there is a bigger view that aviation has already got its chunk of support through the CARES Act, and future support may need to be more broader focus. So there's a little more difficult road with this ahead.
So, but manufacturing normally has a pretty broad support in Congress, right?
Yeah, well, and to me, that's the biggest thing, is it shows that there are some pretty key people in both the House and Senate. I mean, Mark Warner's now got a little bit of seniority, and he's somebody that people listen to. And Rick Larson obviously is a chairman of a pretty important subcommittee, and Ron Estes on Ways and Means. And, even Jerry Moran is a senior lawmaker now. So, it shows that there is support in both the House and the Senate to help with aviation manufacturing sectors. This bill not only has support on Capitol Hill, but obviously the industry, GAMA, AIA, ARSA, the repair stations, all are very strongly, hitting the pavement and supporting this and doing everything they can to get it through.
Okay. Thanks, Kerry. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.